In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a 6-way Varitone rotary switch for guitar. I offer kits available for sale in Reverb at my Chelsea collectibles shop, and I will post the link below. These are the parts that you'll receive in your switch kit. You're going to get a vintage style chicken head knob, 6-way rotary switch, 5 capacitors, 5 resistors, 1 to go to each capacitor, and an induction choke that will be connected to your ground wire. We're now going to wrap the resistors onto each capacitor. And in doing so, I like to just wrap that around and get a pair of pliers to get the lead. Wrap it around a couple times on each. Any excess I'll cut off. And then tighten the last final loops with the pliers. And then you have it attached on this one or this. Some of these older capacitors, the leads have a little bit of corrosion on them since they're so old, and I get either a file or a razor and I'll scrape them down so that they're bare metal. You can use added flux. Sometimes it's just easier to give them a little scrape, a little clean before you start soldering. Now that I've attached each resistor to capacitor, I'm going to solder them. I'm going to solder another resistor to capacitor. And you're going to go through and do each capacitor and resistor set. On this switch, there are 2 outs in the centers here, and you have 12 lugs on the outside. We're only going to use one of the outs, and this switch has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lugs. We're going to be attaching capacitors on 2 to 6, leaving the first one empty for true bypass. We're going to attach a wire to the lug of this switch for the out. I'm going to use a helping hand here to show a little easier. I'm going to attach the wire into the opening. And then I'm going to solder and that's attaching the wire. Next, we're going to install this capacitor. This is a larger capacitor. I like to put this one in first to maneuver the rest of the capacitors around that. This is the 6th, 5th, and 4th position. This is the lug you're going to be attaching this capacitor to. First thing I like to do is pull this lead down to attach the capacitor to give me a little more space in that opening. This lead is a little larger. I like to twist it a little bit, cut it to a point and to length. Cutting it to a point, bending this one out, attaching it for ground. Once that's in, I will get a helping hand to hold it in place while I solder it. Next, I'm going to solder this in place. After we attach that capacitor, then it's a little easier to attach the others around. We're going to do the next one. What I like to do again is bend the lead out. That's going to be for your ground. And then find a distance of where this needs to go to be trimmed, put onto the lug, and then soldered. These are a little easier. They have traditional leads on the capacitors. Then I'm going to use the helping hand to hold it in place and solder. I'm just getting a little extra solder on where the resistor is so that it makes one full contact. And then we're going to put on the 6th position capacitor, again bending the lead so that it's out for when we attach all of the grounds. And this one, as you can see, it has to go on a little bit more of an angle every time. You can attach them any way that is easy for you. You just want to try and make the capacitors together in a little cluster so that it fits your guitar a little easier. And once you solder them in, you do have a little bit of play before you solder the ground wire to make them all solid. Sometimes when you're getting these capacitors in there, you don't have a lot of room, and these unused lugs are getting very close to touching, making contact with other ground, and it's safe to just cut them out. You can just get a wire cutters and cut them out. Just make sure you don't cut something that you're going to need or reuse. These are lugs that are not part of the 6 positions. The lugs that I need are on the other side. Next, we're going to attach the 3rd capacitor, bending the lead out for the ground, measuring where it needs to go, bending the wire if necessary before we trim. Getting into position, holding with the helping hands. And then soldering into place. And then this is the final capacitor, which is actually the first capacitor that's going on the second lead. Again, bending it out, measuring where it needs to go. Putting it in position. And then soldering. And on this switch, the next lug is your first lug, and that's empty, and that'll be your bypass. Next, what we're going to do is bend these lugs so they're all touching each other, wrap a wire around, and then solder them all together so they're all connected. I bent the lead on the larger capacitor and fed the wires through. Next step is going to be wrapping a ground wire around and soldering everything to make sure everything is making contact. I've wrapped the ground wire around all of the leads, and now I'm going to solder. You have to make sure you're getting all the sides of the solder to make contact so that they all hit the ground wire. And you will have to rotate it, making sure that your solder hits everything. You may have to use a little extra added flux if needed. Make sure the solder flows everywhere. You're going to have to rotate it. And that should be good. Next, we're going to attach the choke to the ground wire. Make sure you scrape down on the lead. Sometimes there's corrosion on these older capacitors and chokes. I like to cut the wire short, the lead short, excuse me, and then wrap the wire around and then hit it with some solder. I'm going to use the helping hands again. And then I'm going to cut the other. Wrap the wire around, hold it with the helping hands. and solder. After that's done, as a precaution, I like to put a little shrink tubing over the exposed wire and solder. And then heat it up, and then I'll show you what that looks like next. And that's it. You have your shrink tubing there to cover the contacts. This is the lead for the ground. Your hot coming out of the center of the switch, everything connected. And that's how you're going to build the Varitone style rotary switch. I have installed the 6-way Varitone rotary switch in this guitar. The first setting is on the bypass, and I'm going to run through the settings to give you an idea of the sound. And there you have it, the Varitone rotary switch. Check out my reverb shop, Chelsea Collectibles. And if you found this video helpful, like it. Thank you.